Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with the Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over. The grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. First off, I have to apologize for last week for not getting you the preview for the Arizona game. A lot of things took place that didn't allow me to record, and so a little disappointed I wasn't able to get that out, but it happened. So I will try not to do that in the future, try to get my schedule to work out better, but we'll see how that goes. But as for this week, there's a lot to talk about, and so we'll jump into that. But first, let me tell you about our sponsors, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club filled with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach. Home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, well, let's jump into this. It's, there's a lot of thoughts and feelings about this game. So, hopefully by now you've let it fester a little bit and, you're still frustrated. I don't know what you want. I don't know what you want to feel. If you're listening to this, you've probably somewhat gotten over the loss. I know it's not fully there, but I'm assuming that you're wanting to listen to the breakdown of the game. So maybe that's progress, right? Maybe I'm here to talk you off the ledge, or maybe I'm here to add to your frustrations. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what goes on, and we'll have fun together doing this. So as you all know, anybody that is listening to this podcast, I'd be very surprised if you're listening to this and don't know, but Utah did lose to Arizona 23-10. And if I had done a preview podcast, I would have said that this is one of those games that I expected Utah to come out and perform well. This was never a guaranteed win. I don't think this was ever one of those things. But given what Arizona had shown on film earlier this year, and especially going into the bye week, this game didn't feel like it should have been this way. It felt like Utah should have handled Arizona fairly well. Even with Isaac Wilson starting, I don't think this is a situation that way, but I think this was one of those games where Utah felt confident. They remembered last year. They didn't like the feeling that they felt. I think this year maybe tops that a little bit to some extent. Not a great feeling for them. And Arizona, leaves Rice-Eccles Stadium in a night venue with a win, a place that just honestly isn't one of those places that teams get wins very much. So a lot of things going on there, and interesting to look into. So we're going to jump into that. But first, many of you may see this Twitter user on Twitter. His name's Parker Fleming, or Statso War. He likes to look at a lot of the advanced analytics of games, and one of my favorite things that he posts every single week is, how bad did we get beat? It's a simple graphic that shows a team, or both the teams, and kind of like a bar graph of how these teams look. And, on one end is typically Tennessee. Tennessee is just blowing teams out, and so they absolutely crushed their teams. And how this is measured, to kind of jump into that, you can see this on my Twitter account if you go look there. So he looks at the success rate, and the success rate is essentially, in very simple terms, you're looking at a per play On first downs, did you gain 50% of your yards? That would be considered a success. On second down, did you gain 70% of the yards that you needed to get? On third downs, did you gain 100% of the yards that you needed to get? It's simply just looking at a per play average, or not average, but a per play look of things and kind of showing like how well did you perform on that, right? On first down, if you only got 3 yards, that was not a successful play in terms of the analytics, right? And so it's looking at that. He also measures the EPA, which is the expected points added. This is, going into the nitty-gritty of things. This essentially is looking at it on a per-play basis as well. You're looking at where a team is on the field, what their expected value is, that kind of stuff. So if you're on the 95-yard line, we'll say, which is essentially your 5-yard line, the expected points from that spot is going to be relatively low. That's just generally accepted, right? Like you can expect that to happen. Most people aren't going to score on that play. It's 95 yards, right? Like it's just not that happen. The further you go down the field, the higher the point opportunities are, right? So if you're on the opposite 5-yard line, so if you're on the opposing team's 5-yard line, that's going to be a pretty high number because you're expected to get there. Or is expected to score, or at least come close to that. And so that number is going to be higher to like a 6, right? 6 or 7 because, touchdowns equal 7 points. Yeah, I know 6 points plus the PAT, whatever, but we're going to go into that. So it's measured up everywhere in the field, and there's even more analytics that can go into this and expected on what downs and distances and different things there. That's not what this is fully going into. But essentially he's looking at this, long story short, it's actually a short story long. He's looking at all this to kind of see how well a team did. And so if you're looking at this graph, it shows, all the teams that have played, and it shows that Utah, Arizona were essentially flat, right? Like there was not one team that absolutely dominated the other. One team didn't, do anything. This was a game that absolutely felt like, especially given the score and the stats back that up, that Utah absolutely lost this game, right? Like, no, you got to give credit to Arizona because Arizona did win that game. But this is one of those games where Utah just didn't do what they needed to be able to get it done. They had enough to be able to be in there to win. So, right, like they didn't kill themselves enough in the sense that they weren't right there on par with them. The point is that they just didn't get the points. And so, they were moving the ball up and down the field. You saw, especially on those first 3 drives, and we'll talk more in detail about those in a little bit, but they moved the ball with ease, right? Like you go in there and Utah was doing well. They took a ton of time off the board. They got into the red zone relatively with ease in those first 3 drives, and then it just sputtered. And once again, we'll talk more about that as well, but that's just where it is, right? Like if a team is going down the field, that shows a lot of progress, right? Like you're going to gain a lot of points and you're going to gain a lot of things in the, advanced metrics type things to show that, okay, this team is doing well. You can see that in the total yardage. You can see all that kind of stuff in those metrics. The problem there is then they couldn't convert, right? You're not able to get to the points that you need. You need to get field goals. You need to get touchdowns. You need to get those. And so when you're not getting those, that creates a negative result, and it doesn't help. So interesting point. The point there being that Utah essentially beat themselves, right? Like I said, give credit to Arizona. Noah Fafita, Terrero McMillan, they did phenomenal job. There was a lot of great effort there. Their defense showed up way better than I think anybody was expecting, especially in the run defense. But this was a team where I'd say that you look at this and Utah beat themselves more. And I know some people are going to listen to that and they're going to say, well, no, like Arizona, whatnot. Like I'm not going to get into that, right? Like this really was a game where Utah beat itself. So let's jump into that. First, let's get into the whole Cam Rising situation because this has become a hot button issue, and we're going to get into this because you're seeing online, and my job obviously is to report for the fans. My job is for you as the fans. My job isn't for the university. My job essentially is to find out all the information that I possibly can, be the kind of the eyes and the ears of what is happening around the University of Utah. And Utah, much like many schools around the country, make it very difficult to do that because, they want to keep things tight. They want to do different things that way. We have to find ways to kind of get around that sometimes. But by and large, we're the eyes and the ears of what is happening around the university. Cam Rising obviously is the biggest news value here. And so, I'm monitoring things on social media, kind of seeing the sentiment of what's going on. To some extent, message boards. I don't really like to get into message boards. And so, there's a small subset of things that I get into, and even then I'll kind of skim a lot of things, just kind of get a feel for it. But the general consensus here is there's a split fan base over Cam Rising, right? Some people are even going on Twitter and putting out the hashtag Scam Rising. I don't think that's fair. Yes, Cam Rising is now making money in the NIL era, but this is still an athlete trying to make his best. He's injured. This is not an easy situation for him. The problem is, now that we have introduced NIL into college football or college sports, this becomes an easy avenue for people to attack, right? Somebody is sitting out because they just want to collect the paycheck. You see that in the NBA or the NFL. Whatever. I'm not going to get into the merit of that. I think it's actually ridiculous, to be honest. These guys are competitive players. They want to be in there. Very few, if any, are sitting there on the sideline hoping to cash a check, because at the end of the day, that's going to be a very limited run. And yeah, they're making a handsome sum right now, especially Cam Rising, who's reportedly over the $1 million mark. Multiple $1 million is kind of the number, especially the last few years. But at the end of the day, this is a player that wants to be on the field. We've had a lot of these conversations where there's been so much frustration about Rising, where he's too competitive in some respects, where he takes himself out of the game because he gets injured. He's kind of trying to extend that play, and we've talked about that in the Baylor game, where if he would have just thrown the ball away, earlier, maybe he doesn't take that hit, and then he doesn't fall into the Gatorade, the hydration station, whatever it may be. And so you've got this guy on one hand that is this incredibly competitive person that wants to be on the field, wants to do all this stuff. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of people that are questioning that he doesn't want to be on the field. You can't have both. You really can't. You can't have Cam Rising that's going to come out there and be this competitive person, and then, when times are tough and, he's supposed to be out on the field, say, you know what, I'm just going to cash the paycheck and sit on the sidelines and watch my team suffer. That's not where this situation is. And if you are in this world where you believe that, you're delusional. And I hate to be so harsh with this, but that's not the way that this is, right? Cam Rising wants to be on the field. Did Utah maybe try to look at this and say, we can get this done with Isaac Wilson? Maybe. We can judge that, and we can come look into some of that. But this is a situation where Cam Rising wants to be on the field, but when you're not 100% and you can't perform up to the level that you need to, it's not it's not going to work, right? It just doesn't, it just doesn't happen the way that you need to do it. So at the end of the day, Cam has to feel 100%, maybe not 100%, but you've got to feel at least close to where you can do what you need to at a high level. Kyle Whittingham has talked about this a lot, where he says the best player in terms of health and availability is going to play. Right now, that's just not Cam, right? And I think you go into that game not being able to predict things, but you think that Isaac is going to be able to be good enough to do that. And so you feel confident being able to put him on the field, and Cam can sit on the sidelines, rest up, get an extra week. You've got this week, you've got then the bye week, and everything is okay, right? Kyle Whittingham said after the game he was, quote, really close. I don't love all of that kind of stuff, because then that paints a picture that, he could have played if he wanted to. The reality is Cam is just not ready yet. And I'm not here to kind of defend him or any of that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, he has to be on the field when it matters. But I think this kind of rhetoric that goes around with these players that they're not competitive and they don't want to play is just kind of ridiculous. He wants to be on the field. He wants to be there. He doesn't want to sit there and cash a paycheck. All those things are beneficial, but at the end of the day, that's not what it is. He remains Utah's best option, and that's not a knock towards Isaac Wilson. Isaac needs to get that experience, but he remains that best option. He knows it. The team knows it. They're going to do their best in those moments, but he is doing everything he can to be there. I don't love the rhetoric around, how Utah handles this and how they want to talk about it or not talk about it. That can be a different discussion, and I can 100% champion a lot of that because I'm frustrated as well. But at the end of the day, he's doing his best to be able to be on the field. And you're going to get him when he's ready, right? I understand there's a lot of this PTSD from the 2023 season. You're frustrated with that. That was handled terribly. We've talked about that at length. It just didn't work. But this is a guy that wants to be on the field. We're going to leave it at that. That's the frustrations that you can see and hear. But at the end of the day, he's going to be on the field when he's ready to play. And you can argue that and be frustrated with that, and I'm fine with that. But he wants to be out there on the field, and that's where it is. So we'll leave it at that. We'll move on, and we'll go from there. All right, let's go to the next point. Isaac Wilson is going to take the brunt of this loss, and you've seen it on Twitter. Once again, another thing that is not fairly put on him. It's just a situation that is not easy, right? And the quarterback's going to get that. You're going to get all the love. You're going to get all the hate. That's just the nature of the position, whether you want it or not, right? The end of the day, it's not all on him. You saw early on in that game where he gets in there, it's his first start at Rice-Eccles Stadium, I'll mind you. He has played, and there's a difference, right? Like his 2 starts before this were on the road, tough environment on its own, right? But at the same time, I kind of look at my kids. Like I have a son that played junior high basketball, and when he was on the road, he felt much more free because he didn't feel like his friends were there watching him. You get at home, and he kind of turned into a shell of himself a little bit, and didn't want to perform, and kind of did things in a different way because now his friends were watching. And so you kind of sabotage yourself in some respects because, you don't want to suck in front of your friends or your peers, and then you end up doing that, right? Or maybe you're not performing as better. To some extent, I'm not saying that that's what Isaac was at, but I think there is some of that added pressure, right? This is your very first start at Rice-Eccles Stadium as a member of the Utes, right? He's done that at, Corner Canyon. He played at Rice-Eccles Stadium in a far different setting. He's played in cleanup minutes with Baylor and also Southern Utah in garbage minutes, essentially. But this is his first start in front of everybody that he knows. There's going to be recruits there. There's going to be friends there. There's going to be family there. There's an entire fan base there cheering him on. And he shows out in the very first 3 drives, right? He comes in there and he moves the ball. This looked like, to me, the most comfortable Isaac Wilson has looked. He starts out 7 of 7, perfect. Everything's going well. They're moving the ball with ease, and things are looking up, right? And as the game developed, things didn't go as planned, right? I think in the second half, you started to see him kind of force things a little bit more. He kind of pushed things a little bit more, but that's because Utah was playing in the deficit, right? Like they needed to find something. And so they're putting a lot more pressure on him to succeed because they can't just run the ball every single time. Yeah, the run game can be effective at times, but when you get into those situations where, you're down and you're trying to push that tempo and trying to get the points, you've got to pass the ball, right? Like that's the fastest way to do it. You take less time off the clock, at least for the most part. And so you're putting him in a terrible, terrible position to be able to do that. A lot of pressure for a freshman quarterback in his 3rd start. At the end of the day, yes, there's things that he needs to work on. And there's some things, that you can nitpick and you can go in here and you can say, he didn't hit this or he needed to do that. And they're all probably valid. But once again, freshman quarterback. And I know a lot of people got tired of that, and it's just like, well, whatever. To me, I don't know what you expect him to be, right? Like as a freshman, I don't know if you expect him to be Cam Rising. No, he's never going to be Cam Rising this year, right? Like you're seeing progress every single year. If you actually look at the PFF grades, he's better than he was last week. Even considering everything that happened in that game, he was still better in most stats in PFF, for that game. So for whatever you thought he did in Oklahoma State, and, he had his issues there as well, he was better in this game. He moved the ball. At the end of the game, or I should say, at halftime, he was 12 of 20 for 154 yards, had no touchdowns, no interceptions. He did take 2 sacks, and one of those sacks was pretty costly. But by and large, he had a good performance outside of the touchdowns. Like I said, we're going to get into that. I promise you. Stick with me. I'm going to break down these red zone plays one by one. We're going to get into that. But, he was doing everything he needed to be able to move the ball downfield. By the end of the game, his stat line is 20 of 40. 40 passes, by the way, for a freshman quarterback. That's a ton. Like, you shouldn't be able to do that. That's a number that Cam Rising doesn't even put up, even when he's, doing really well or struggling or whatever, like they generally don't have 40 passes for him. He's usually in the 30 range, maybe 35. That's a lot of passes to put on a player, especially, as a freshman. He finishes with 280 yards, still a great number. He does exactly what he needs to be able to move the ball downfield, gets a touchdown. Yes, he has 2 interceptions. One of those especially was not great. He just didn't make the right read, right? He didn't loft the ball enough. He just threw it right to the defender. If you actually look at the play from kind of the all-22 version, the bird's eye view of it, he actually had, I think it was Brant Keithy in the middle of the field. I can't remember who it was exactly. But he had him wide open in the middle of the field. Same yardage, could have had the same type of thing. But he keyed in on that throw and it just didn't work. So it happens, right? He knows that he needs to get rid of those. And, I'm going to play some audio from him that kind of says that. But at the end of the day, he was put in a tough spot. And his numbers didn't show out great in terms of a stats number, but he's going to take the brunt of that because he's the one that didn't, at the end of the day, fully execute the offense the way that everybody thought, right? That's what everybody thinks. So he's going to take that blame. I don't want to say he welcomes that, but he understands that that's where it needs to be. So let me just play a couple audio clips from him and just kind of get his take, because I think they are mature. I think he's looking at it. He's taking the responsibility for himself while also recognizing that it is a team game. This is not this is not an easy situation for him to be able to be thrown into this. It's his first loss, So here's his post game. Not many people wanted to ask the players questions for some reason, so I had to ask both of these questions. But here's what Isaac said after the game.
Isaac, in your eyes, where did things kind of go wrong on the offensive side of the ball?
I can't name everything, but we needed to execute in the red zone. I could have put the team in a better situation at some points, but it's a team game, so just got to execute.
Isaac, how do you feel like you guys can improve moving forward? I know it's still fresh, but where do you feel like you can improve the most?
Me personally?
Just the offense in general.
Like I said, converting those red zones. I know better on those interceptions. I know better. I shouldn't put the team in that situation. I felt like we were driving the ball up and down the field the whole time. Run game, pass game, but red zone.
Yeah, this is a situation where the red zone was the biggest problem, right? And his 2 interceptions, yes, they were costly, right? Like they came in the second half and they didn't help. But really, if you look at how the game developed, those interceptions were, I don't want to say insignificant to the game, because I don't want to erase that kind of stuff, right? I mean, he has 7 interceptions on the season. That's something that he absolutely has to clean up. But at the same time, Utah did most of their damage to themselves in that first half. They didn't give themselves any momentum. They didn't do whatever they needed to. You had 3 especially great opportunities to score, and you got really nothing out of that. Those interceptions at the end, yeah, you can't have those to be able to kind of come back from a team, right? But I would say those are kind of a wash, in my opinion, based on that first half. If you're not able to get it done in that first half the way that they had executed the ball leading up to that point, those interceptions don't matter, right? Because you get in there and, yeah, obviously, like, he's going to play differently and everything's going to be better. But it's not a situation where those were super costly. They're still costly. Like, I get it. Any interception is not great, and Kyle Whittingham always wants to limit those. But at the end of the day, the real damage came in the first half with the red zone woes. So before I jump into that, because that's going to be a big point here, there are areas where Isaac can improve, right? One of those is he holds onto the ball too long sometimes, right? And part of that is he's gonna welcome sacks. And so when you have these teams that are stacking the box, and all of these teams are stacking the box because they want to put him under pressure. They want to see how he works. They want to be able to force him into mistakes. That's what you do with a freshman quarterback. You would be dumb just to rush 3 or 4 on most of the times because you want to put pressure on him. Now, obviously, he has to beat you, and if he does, then you have to kind of start relaxing those defenses a little bit. but they're going to continue to put that pressure on him, and he's going to continue to face those for as long as he's playing as a starter this year, as he develops and he gets into the sophomore, junior range. And if he's making those same types of mistakes as a sophomore, junior, yeah, you have far more reasons to criticize that. But as a freshman, he's getting in there and he's learning that, right? So he's got to learn to get the ball out a little bit faster. He's got to read those routes a little bit better and go through his progressions faster. That's all a timing thing, right? You're seeing him do it much better each week, but it's still going to take a minute, right? It's going to take time for him to be able to feel comfortable there. The thing with him, though, is he stays there in the pocket, right? He's not afraid of the pressure most of the time, right? There's some times where he just realizes it's not going to happen, and you have to do with what you can, and he's got a great escapability, and so he can kind of try to do that sometimes. And so that's on two different hands. Like, he's got to stay in there and maintain it. There was a few shots. I think there was one late in the game, that Dorian Singer 37-yard pass, I believe. Isaac took a shot, but he knew that he could get it to Dorian, and he did it. And that's what you have to do. You have to put your body on the line to be able to help your team. Those are the types of plays that I think are far more encouraging to me, because he's willing to be in there. You can't be careless, right? Like, you've got to be able to be smart about how things are done. But he understands where he needs to be. There was a couple rollout plays that he made where he, had the pass where he was on the rollout and he's doing it on the run. One of them specifically, he did it to his left, which is a very difficult throw, and he still completed the pass on the sidelines. Great plays, especially for a freshman to make. And those are those types of plays that gives you the optimism there. Outside of that, he's got to recognize those sack situations, right? He's got to figure out how not to get in those big ones, right? Like, if you take a sack 1 or 2 yards, it's going to happen. Every quarterback's going to do that. Some of that's on the offensive line, pass protection, whatever it may be, but he's got to recognize those things. He's got to keep his feet moving. He's got to do all those things to be able to maintain that. All in all, though, I mean, you're seeing progress on a week-to-week basis. I don't understand quarterbacks to the level that I need to nitpick every little thing and say, okay, he's not going through that. But if I can't, I'm going to guess a majority of the fan base can't either. That's not a knock on anybody. I just think most people don't understand the high-level details that it takes to be able to be a quarterback and what it means, right? Like, how his feet are placed, where he's going, different things there. Should he plant his feet? What, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is far more than others. I think people just see things that aren't working and then they just throw it on the quarterback. But at the end of the day, Isaac is improving. He's doing well. He's finding ways to be able to improve, and it's working out for him. So yes, Isaac has to improve. That's a given. That's any freshman. He wants to be able to get to where he needs to be, right? Like he said in previous weeks, he said, look, I don't want to be the guy that is like, no, it's a freshman mistake. He wants to be there as a veteran, right? And it's going to take time. This isn't something that he's just going to magically get better at overnight, right? Like, the more reps that he's getting, the better that's going to be. But it's just going to take some time. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I know you want to feel frustrated and you want to take it out on people, and Isaac is the easy one because he's the freshman and he's not producing at the level that Cam, you're expecting him to produce at. But that's an unfair comparison for him anyway. He does have to improve, but he's making the progress every single week, and it just, Utah got bit, and not all of that is based on him. So after all this, like, telling you that I'm going to get to it, we're going to get to it. Right now, we're looking at the red zone. So I went back and I pulled up all of these plays, right? And I looked at them, and I kind of studied the film, so to speak, on that. And I'm not some expert on this, right? Like, I understand enough, but I'm not going to be the guy that says, okay, this player should do this in this situation. I just don't have that know-how to be able to get to there. So you're not going to get fully to that extent. But kind of looking first off at kind of the red zone for Utah this year. Coming into the season, Andy Ludwig said red zone is going to be one of their strongest suits. Obviously, they were expecting Cam Rising to be the starter for all of this time. At the same time, Utah just hasn't really been a great red zone team, at least to the levels that you would consider to be great, right? This year, they rank 88th in the country. They're converting 81.8% in the red zone. The bad part there is only 50% of those are touchdowns. So all of the conversions, so of the 81%, 82% will round up, Of all the 82% of the conversions, 50% of those have been touchdowns, 32% have been field goals. You can't be as successful if you're going to have that field goal number be that high, right? If your touchdown percentage is at 50%, it's not a great sign, right? You can get into the red zone all the times that you want, but if field goals are going to be what you do, it's not going to be a great situation. You can kind of look back on about 2017 for Utah. Utah finished the season at 52.4% in the touchdowns. That's kind of where they're at right now. They're actually lower than that, so that's not great. Utah had a real tough time trying to win games that season. They still did well, but they had a tough time winning games that season because they were kicking more field goals than they were getting touchdowns. It's the natural thing. This shouldn't be too difficult to understand. You've got to score more touchdowns than field goals. We get it. Utah's been in the red zone 22 times this year. 18 of those have been successful, 11 touchdowns, 7 field goals. Like I said, not a great number. But looking back each year, Utah hovers around kind of relatively the same number, right? 2023, so last year, they were the same number, 81.2%, so just a slight lower with 52% touchdowns. 2022 and 2021, these are the years that Cam Rising was there, where Utah wins the championship. Everything is going well. You're scoring points at a high level. This is great. They were exactly 83.6% both years. Touchdown on 2022 was 72.6, far better. If you're getting it over 70%, that's generally going to be one of the best teams in the country. That's not always a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Like you can't say, if you're scoring 70% of the touchdowns that you get in the red zone, that you're going to win. You just may not get into the red zone a ton, and when you do score touchdowns. That you can't fully look at that, but at the same time, that is a general basis of if you're scoring over 70% of those as touchdowns, you're going to do well. 2021 they were 71.2, so another great metric. 2019, we're skipping 2020. I'm not even going to touch it. 2019 they were 67.3% touchdowns. Tyler Huntley was doing really well. They got it. Everything was good. Everything beyond that, 2018. Was actually their highest percentage. They got into the red zone. They scored at almost a 90% rate. They were 89.8. But the problem is their touchdowns were 57.1%. They kicked a lot of field goals. They had a great opportunity there in being able to do that. They were actually 16th in the country in red zone conversion, but it didn't matter. I don't want to say it didn't matter. It just wasn't those touchdowns, right? So by and large, Utah for the most part can get into the red zone, right? They haven't had a problem getting in there. Execution has been decent, but you're seeing whenever they drop below that 70%, that things start to get a little bit wonky. That's where Utah is right now. They're in a world of hurt. This is going to be a situation where they're going to talk about the red zone for the entire 2 weeks of this bye week leading up to Arizona State, and they should, because this is clearly the biggest problem here is the red zone execution. Some of that is play calling. Some of it is just generally execution, right? And you're going to get some of that because of a freshman quarterback, right? He's not going to be able to see things as well. Everything that you had in the open field where if, let's say, you're on the 50-yard line, that gets completely, short, much more shortened. Things have to be much quicker. The margin of error is so much more difficult. So this is where a quarterback, especially a freshman quarterback, is probably going to struggle the most just because of that situation. And, that's the nature of it. That's any quarterback. Any quarterback's going to struggle in that area, which is, it's tough. It's not an easy situation. So let's go through this, though. Let's go through the first drive. So the first drive, Utah drives all the way down. They get to Arizona's 11-yard line. They throw Mike Mitchell in, and let me just say, Mekhi Bernard does a phenomenal job of being able to do what he needs to do. He's absolutely taken the reins. He is RB1 for all intents and purposes, right? But Utah has a telltale, and anytime they want to be able to pick up yards on a third down and they're going to run it, they throw Mike Mitchell out there. And part of that is he's hampered, he's injured. We get that. But at the same time, there's this telltale where if you put him out in third down, every team knows that you're going to run it. And for the most part, in this situation, they were 3rd and 3 on Arizona's 11-yard line. It's most likely a running play. It's kind of a little far where you can kind of, maybe take your chances. Maybe it is a passing play. It's not a guaranteed pickup on third down. But you see this where you throw him out there, and anybody that's watching this and looking at film is going to see, okay, Mike Mitchell is trotting out onto the field. We know that this is going to be a run play. Real easy thing for the defense to signal over and say, hey, they're going to run this. Most likely it's going to be up the middle, A gap, B gap type situation, and we can stop this, right? Load up the box. You're going to be fine. At the end of the day, I don't have a problem with this call. It's a fine call. I think it's okay. I think the telltale sign thing, that hurts them. They talked about not having those types of things in the preseason to say that they wanted to make sure that everything was okay. But at minimum, Arizona loaded up the box. They had 6 defenders in the box. They were ready for this, as you would be. This isn't anything scientific or anything, but they loaded up the box, and Mitchell gets a 1-yard run. Okay, that's great. Like I said, I don't hate the call necessarily. I don't love the execution of it or how it was, how it was put together. But it's actually not a bad play. So whatever, you got that. It's bad on a 3rd down because of where you're at. But you're in 4-down territory. You're going to go for it most likely, right? So now you're 4th and 2 at the 10-yard line. This is a spot where, it's an easy field goal, but I don't blame Utah for trying to go for the, the first down. You're early on in the game. This is the very first drive of the game. You haven't even seen what Arizona's going to do. You have a lot of faith in your defense. If you don't get this, it sucks to get a turnover on downs, but at the end of the day, it's not going to really be that instrumental in the game, or at least it doesn't feel like that because, like I said, you've got a defense. Everything is going to be okay. Once again, they trot Mike Mitchell out onto the field. Don't have a problem with that. Mitchell is a bigger body guy. You want him to be able to pick up the yards. This one, they put in 14 personnel. So they've got 3 of their tight ends lined up on the left side. Most likely it's going to be a run to that side of the ball, right? You have 10 defenders in the box. It's a 4th and 2. They're going to do everything they can. They had a high safety just in case. Utah has put that on film where, Mike Mitchell tries to run over, and then they put Brant Keithy streaking down the sideline, and suddenly it's a touchdown. So, they've got that high safety, and that high safety is, not really that high because he's only 10 yards off the box instead. But so they're out there. They've got this jumbo package essentially, and they're ready to go. The problem here is those 3 tight ends on the left side. They do their job and they block up really well, but you had a corner off to the side who was kind of playing some loose coverage, not fully in the box, but kind of in the box, that easily gets to Mike Mitchell as Mike Mitchell tries to go off the edge on the left-hand side, and suddenly it's a real easy stop. It's actually a 1-yard loss, and Utah's toast. Now it's a turnover on downs. Once again, I don't hate this situation. In retrospect, obviously you want to kick. You want to be able to get those 3 points, but I don't think this is a necessarily bad spot. So, not great. Play calling, you can argue that. To me, I think maybe in that situation, I don't know why Utah isn't getting more of these jet sweeps or putting some motion or doing different things there. But whatever. We'll call that good. So, one drive, so be it. Second drive. This time you're actually deeper into the red zone. Not much more, but you're deeper into the red zone. You get down to a 2nd and goal situation on the Arizona 6-yard line. This one was a designed rollout to the left for Isaac Wilson. He comes out. They're in 12 personnel. You had 2 out, 2 wide receivers flexed out, Money Parks and Dorian Singer in essentially a rub route, pick play type situation. And it just didn't materialize, right? This just didn't work. Isaac didn't have anything there. The defense read it really well, and he had to throw it away. Smartly throws it away. Good play. Okay, so everything's good there. Now you're in a third and goal on the 6-yard line. This one, Utah had 2 backers. They had 3 receivers that were a little more tight in coverage, but they had a lot more options available to him this time. This, they executed in a way where Isaac steps back into the pocket. He's kind of staring off to one of his receivers pretty long. He stops moving his feet, which I don't know what he's coached in that situation, but generally, quarterbacks need to keep their feet moving, keep being mobile, doing whatever. But there may be a situation there. I don't know fully in this situation where, maybe he needed to stop, but needs to keep active feet, move well. And he doesn't, he doesn't see his first read go. He can't really get through his progressions too much because all of a sudden, it's getting blown up. And so he scrambles. It's actually a great play. It works well. Once again, I don't know if this is the design where they have him look off to make sure it looks like it's going to be a pass play, and then he scrambles off to the left and gets the touchdown. Actually, a really good play. He gets there. He gets 4 yards on it. The safety / corner reads the play and stops him, or at least makes enough of a play that kind of knocks him off a little bit, and he gets tackled 2 yards before the line of scrimmage. This is actually the play that he comes up a little hobbled and doesn't look like he's going to play. He actually looked like he was going to go to the medical tent for a minute. They were checking him out for a bit. They had the time because an Arizona player got injured, and so they had a lot of time to kind of look at him. But it's realized that he's okay, comes back onto the field for a 4th and goal. So Utah decides to go back out there. You're on the 2-yard line. So once again, you can see why Utah isn't going to take the points there, right? Like at this point, if you can't get something at the 2-yard line, that's, I don't want to call it a bad look, but like you should be able to probably get 2 yards. So you get in there, and everybody knows that this is going to be a situation where Utah's trying to go for it, whatever that may be. So they go into 13 personnel, and then they flex Loner out as a wide receiver. So you have these 3 tight ends close, and then you have Loner out as your only guy there. You have a back, obviously, with the 13 personnel. But Loner is the only guy flexed out as a receiver. So Wilson goes into a quick play action and then immediately throws it to Loner in the end zone, who is the only option that he's got, and the pass is broken up. The play there, I don't necessarily hate the play because I think if it works, it's perfect, right? Like Loner's there. It was a low pass. I think maybe this is one of those things where Isaac probably could have put it up a little bit higher, forced the DB to be able to go up for it, right? Especially with Loner's size. He did throw it a little bit lower, allowed the DB to have a lot of room to be able to get into it. But the ball just came much quicker, I think, than Loner was even expecting. And so that happens. My problem with this play in the play calling, though, is that you only had one option. You didn't have anything else. The play action was an incredibly fast play action. It wasn't even really much of a fake to the back at all. Everybody that quickly saw that knew that this was going to be a passing play. The DB did his job phenomenally. You can argue whether he got there first. The refs let them play through this stuff. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I think it's close enough that they're going to say that he didn't, right? And you can't fault them for that. I think there's a lot of those situations that the DB, and I'm blanking on his name, he was the guy that broke up all of the things. So this is things where you have one player that's the read. So Isaac has no other recourse to be able to go to. He quickly gets the ball out and he goes to that. That to me is probably the hardest aspect of that. You did have Brant Keithy that kind of like at the very end looked like he was going to have a little shallow out route. The play developed way too fast that it doesn't look to me that this was actually part of the plan, especially with how fast they got the ball out. I don't know if Isaac was rushing it and he just saw the opportunity, or if there was that secondary play where Keithy is then, blocking and then goes on the out route and does what he needs to that way. That's, it is what it is. But now you're in a situation where you've been in the red zone 2 trips, points were essentially there. At minimum, you should have 6 points. Arizona had already gone down and scored a field goal, so it would have been 6-3. You still have that lead. You've got that comfort. Everything's there. If you manage to do better, you're 14-3, right? Like you're feeling much better about yourself. Okay, we got that. So now let's go to the third drive. And I know we're going into this pretty nitty-gritty, but we're going to go that. Utah does get 3 points on this one, so they do elect to get the field goal. But, this is a situation, once again, you could have been 21-3 or 9-3. Either way, I think both of those actually work really well for you. Even when Arizona eventually scored a touchdown and it became, 10-3, this in this case would have been 10-9. Terrible score, by the way, but it would be at least much more manageable. Not that 10-3 isn't, but at least maybe you feel like you're still in this game because you're scoring points. So let's look at this one. Knowing that on the 4th down that they kicked the field goal, let's start with the 2nd and 5. Once again, they're on the 6-yard line. They put Mekhi Bernard in there. Bernard, he gets 1 yard essentially on this. This one, I think he probably could have read a little bit better. So this one maybe is an execution problem. He cut out when he could have cut in. The blocker was there, but he cut into the wrong way as the block was going, and so that really kind of hampered the play. I think Mekhi probably could have gotten a few more yards on that. But at the end of the day, it's second down. You get a yard. It's not the end of the world. You could have gotten more, so maybe execution problem, okay? Going to 3rd and 4, they're on the 5-yard line. 11 personnel. They've got 2 backs. 2 are flexed outside, so you've got Money Parks and Dorian Singer once again. They put Money in motion, and this to me looked like the play that they probably should have run at the 2-yard line in terms of just having options, right? There was so many options there available to Wilson in this situation, and it becomes a much easier situation for him to manage. Now, there's still a lot that he has to do, and he has to be able to, go through his progressions in a much quicker way. But at least you've got options. You've got, Money Parks that's going off in the motion, and you've got different opportunities. If you look at the play, there's just more players there. Like, that's the simple math, right? The problem here is the interior of the O-line gets blown up really quickly. Like, Arizona did a tremendous job of being able to break into that and get onto the ball, and it forces Isaac to really just kind of panic a little bit, and he had to throw the ball essentially to Money Parks, who was easily covered. There wasn't even a play there, right? Like, the DB was already in front of them. The play wasn't there, and Isaac kind of just had to throw it to make sure that he got it. If it would have developed maybe 30, that's not 30 seconds. That's terrible. A half a second further, Dellen Bentley is right there at the front of the goal line as he's trying to get out of the pack, and he probably could have had an easy touchdown that way. But it's a tough spot, right? The O-line got blown up. Not much you can do. They ended up having to settle for 3. But it's a lot of this types of stuff between the play calling and the execution is kind of coming together, right? Looking at it, it's not all fully on Andy Ludwig, right? Like, there are plays here that needed to be fixed. Like I said, that one option for Wilson when he threw it out to Caleb Lohner, I don't love that play at all. I think you can have more options for him to at least do more. Like, give him a second option, just a second, pass or something that helps. And maybe that is Keithy. Maybe that was Isaac not executing it in a way that he needed to. But you've got to be able to give him something in a quicker way that he can get to that. There are times, like I said, where Isaac needs to improve and he needs to get there. But as I said, he's a freshman in these situations. As a freshman, you've got to find ways to make him feel comfortable, knowing that this is an area where it's going to be so much more difficult. And Arizona, with their defense, everything about their defense was always coming into the game. Their run defense wasn't as great. Their secondary, their passing defense was actually probably the best asset on their team. And so you knew those plays were going to be tough, right? So how do you scheme it up to make it better? And in turn, you essentially made it very difficult on Isaac Wilson to be able to do this. So yes, it's a combination of things. It's Andy Ludwig, Kyle Whittingham, whoever you want to call it, and do that. But at the same time, it's a matter of being able to have the execution and do all that kind of stuff. Okay. So there's that. 4th drive, Utah goes 3 and out. This one, actually, Wilson took a bad 8-yard sack, and that really hampered Utah. Mekhi Bernard on the next play got 9 yards, but then after that, it just didn't really work, and they were forced to punt it away. Didn't really work great. 5th drive, they stalled at midfield, and, were doing well, got to midfield, and then had 3 incomplete passes. It just happens, right? One of those, I believe, was broken up by that same DB that I'm blanking on. And, it is what it is. You can argue whatever those types of things are, but they essentially tried to do what they could. You just can't complete passes. Not everything's going to be completed, right? Like, some drives are just going to happen. But to me, the whole game was really those first 3 drives, right? Like, I didn't go through all these drives in the game. I don't think it really matters. I think it was those first 3 drives that really were the story of the game. And they didn't execute, right? They didn't execute. The play calling was not great. On top of that, the offensive line, for the most part, just there were successes there, but all in all, it was just not a great effort. They were allowing a lot of interior pressure. Funny enough, like Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, on the outsides actually had one of the better days. Like Spencer Fano actually had a great day according to PFF. Like his pass coverage was great. He scored an 84.1. His run was dipped a little bit to a 74.6, but for an overall grade of 80, he graded out tremendous. Like next to Dorian Singer, who graded out as the highest, Spencer Fano was there. So he, for the most part, he did his job and what he needed to do. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of who did what and that. Like I don't like getting into that situation of this player was terrible at that or that, whatever. Like just know that the interior pressure was coming, and that's not just the guards, right? There was still stuff where it was the outside, the tackles, the center, different things there that weren't working as well. But it just was not a great situation. They were getting a lot of pressure compared to what was happening last week, where they were kind of the standout. They did incredibly well. If this type of performance took place last week against Oklahoma State, I don't think Utah wins that game. I just don't. I think this is one of those things where the offensive line play absolutely helped this, and it hurt them against Arizona, and that's partially why the execution in the red zone didn't take place either. Outside of that, Mekhi Bernard ran for 91 yards on 16 carries, had a 5.7 yard average. He got his yards and he did well. I understand why it was tough where they couldn't kind of utilize him as much in the second half just because of where they were at. They needed to get some points, and so passing became much more of a, you had to get the ball out. And so you needed to do that, not drain the clock. But he's averaging 5.7 yards per carry. He was doing his job. Obviously, you could have probably gotten a little bit more out of him. Kyle still doesn't like to do anything more than about 20, 25 being his max. He still had a few carries in there that he could have run. But at the same time, I think Utah was just kind of in a spot where I don't want to say they started to panic, but when you get limited amount of touches on the ball, you have to make the most of them. And so you're generally going to pass the ball more in those situations when you're down. And so that kind of is the tough thing there. Outside of that, Kyle Whittingham called Dorian Singer outstanding, and he graded out as the highest on the offense with an 81.5. He had 155 yards on 9 catches. He was targeted 18 times. That's crazy. 18 times and he caught 9 catches. That's tough, but he did exactly what he needed to. The one knock there is maybe that Isaac was utilizing him as too much of his receiver in terms of kind of being his guy that he went to. Not a bad guy to go to, right? 155 yards, that's a great showing, and Dorian did everything that he needed to. But that's, you've got to have more options available to you. You got to spread the ball around. You had 6 receivers that caught a pass. But there just needs to be more there, and some of those, I don't have the all 22, so I can't fully see this. I'm going to try to record this on my own to make sure that I can see these play routes designed better, so that I can't try to recall it on memory, because it doesn't happen. But to my knowledge, I didn't see as many open receivers this time as we did in weeks past. Arizona did a much better job of covering them up and doing well there. So Singer was the best option, and it worked out for him. But I think that's kind of an area where you also have to kind of improve and kind of showcase that you've got something there. So outside of that, defensive effort just was subpar, right? Like Kyle Whittingham called it so-so. It wasn't anything great. It wasn't anything terrible. But at the end of the day, they were making, arm tackles. They were going bad angles. There just wasn't a lot of urgency, it looked like, to be able to get to players in different situations. And it absolutely hurt Utah, right? At the end of the day, though, Arizona scores 23 points. That's not insurmountable. For a team like Utah, which is built to be able to score more points than that, 23 points isn't that bad. And considering Arizona's defense outside of its secondary, they should have been able to have more points. They moved the ball at will, so it's not a matter of not being able to do it. The hard part is you just didn't do enough, right? And you can't pin that all on the defense, but at the same time, there were a lot of lapses there. And I think this is the game where you especially miss Connor O'Toole and Karene Reed. I don't know fully their status and when they're going to come back. I would imagine that Connor O'Toole is back by Arizona State, so he gets rested up by then. Karene Reed, it'll be close. I don't know if you'll have him by Arizona State, but it'll be close. And, that's just kind of a hard injury with his ankle to be able to kind of know when he's going to be healthy there. For all the complaints about Cam Rising in his fingers and ankles, it's tough to manage. And so you just kind of have to do with what you can and kind of try to live with what's going on. So those two players, though, I think absolutely give Utah everything that they need, right? Karene Reed, especially, you need him in that field. You need him as your communicator. You need him kind of as the stabilizer of what that defense is able to do. He's got a lot of knowledge. He understands the system in and out, and he just kind of becomes this controlling force, calming force, so to speak, that allows the team to be able to work. So getting him back on the field is big. They've got players that can do it, so it's not like it's all Karene or bust, but you do take a noticeable hit when he's not on the field. Connor O'Toole, similar. You get added pressure. Having those three defensive ends helps. Not to say that Utah can't get there with the two that they've got, because they have been great, right? You've got Logan Fano and Van Fillinger, who have done a great job, but you just add more to that, right? Connor O'Toole is considered one of the best, and that just creates opportunities that allows Van on the other side of the ball to be able to get more opportunities, because they have to put a lot of pressure on that left side with Connor O'Toole. So all in all, it's one of those things where it all works out together, and Utah's a much better team when all of those players are on the field. And that shouldn't come as a surprise. They're starters for a reason, but I think you're starting to notice where their impact was most felt in that game. So outside of that, as a result of the game, Utah drops to 18 in the AP Top 25 poll. For the fans that are really upset about that, BYU jumped them and put them at 17. Iowa State now is at 16 to lead the Big 12. I still don't fully believe in Iowa State. I'm curious to see how they kind of develop throughout the season. Kansas State is at 20. Arizona's receiving votes. They would technically be the 26th team. Oklahoma State's receiving votes, and so is Colorado. But this is I know a lot of people have talked about this being a wide open conference, and I don't disagree. But I think when you see a Utah team that is executing it the way that it knows that it can, and I know that's a lot of teams, right? That's the nature of it. But I think Utah still is in a good spot. This isn't time to panic. I think there's definitely things that Utah has to clean up, and if they come out of the bye week and still a lot of those issues are present, then there's a lot more to worry about. But it's a long road. The bye week comes at a great time. I know they say that all the time, but I think this one does especially. You get that bad taste in your mouth for 2 weeks now to kind of keep you motivated, keep you humble and hungry and moving forward and get onto that road game against Arizona State and do better. So this is a team we'll see, right? We'll see what their resolve is. We'll see kind of where they're at. I don't think anybody is necessarily down to the point that it's going to change their tone on the season. If anything, I think it's going to make them hungry. And I think, Mekhi Bernard was visibly frustrated, and he said this is going to make him much more motivated going into the next week. And so we'll see how it goes. But things aren't great, right? In terms of where they feel like it should be. But at the end of the day, you're 4-1. Things are okay. It's not the end of the world. It's going to be a long season, and everything is still in front of it for Utah, so everything should be okay. But we'll call that a day. We'll try to get another podcast this week, see how things are there with media availability. But for that, we will call it a day, and we'll chat with you later.